The Bhagavad Gita is the direct word of God. But when we read it, we find that some of the verses seem to apparently contradict each other. But examining each case closely, we find that there was no real contradiction. I give you one example. In one verse, God says that He is equal to all and no one is dear to Him, and He does not despise anybody. Then in chapter 12 we find that He again and again says between verse 13 and 19, so and so is dear to me. The one who possesses these qualities is dear to me. So first He said nobody is dear to Him. Then now He says so and so is dear to Him. And now in verse 20 of the same chapter He says the one who follows all these qualities in his life, lives these qualities in his life in practice, is extremely dear to Him. Now He goes a step ahead. No one is dear to Him, so and so is dear to me, Him, and then so and so is very dear to me. And He doesn't stop there. In chapter 18, the last chapter, towards the end, in verse 69, He says that the one who spreads the liberating knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita among his devotees, among people, is the one who is so dear to Him that nobody will ever be as dear to Him as this one. Now, so many types of degrees of being dear to God are found in the Bhagavad Gita. So how do you reconcile the various statements? It's very easy. Let me explain. The first verse that I cited, Samohang Sarvabhuteshu Name Dvesho Asti Na Priya. Nobody is either dear to me and nobody I despise. That was in the context of operation of the law of karma. We must understand one thing. Even though God says that I do, He has clarified that He doesn't do anything usually about the natural universal order. It is the nature that does. He has delegated His powers to nature with set principles, set laws of nature, and they operate blindly. Be it a devotee of God or be it a criminal, if an act of criminality is committed, the nature punishes blindly, both of them, a devotee of God and a non-devotee of God. In that way, God or God's principles are equal, apply equally to everybody. Now, having said that, let us come to the chapter 12 and its verses contained within verse 13 to verse 20. He says, for example, Yasman no dujate loko loka no dujate chaya harshamarsh bhayo dvegair mukto yah sacha me priya. The one who does not perturb others, with his words or actions is dear to God. And the one who doesn't get perturbed by acts or words of others is also dear to Him. And similarly, in many verses He says this, so and so is dear to me. Now, being dear to God does not mean that He will not be punished for wrongdoing. At times it happens that people have very good qualities, divine qualities, and yet at some time they commit some crime or some sin or some offense. They will be punished for that. God will not spare, or nature will not spare him. Now He says that the one who spreads the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita among people, he is dearest among all to Him. First, let's understand why it is so. This is so because a bhakti yogi, a karma yogi, a jnana yogi, a dhyana yogi, anybody practicing any of these paths, the path of meditation, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, loving devotion, the path of detached action, they are all dear to God. But if you go into depth, you will find that all these people are essentially driven by an enlightened self-interest to free themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Not all others, themselves. So they are working for themselves. Whereas a person who spreads the liberating knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita brings hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of people to the threshold of nirvana, moksha, eternal happiness, eternal freedom from the cycle of birth and death and suffering. Therefore, he is bound to be the dearest person to God, because he is not driven by simply the drive to liberate himself from suffering. He wants to liberate many people from suffering. That is why he is dearest to God. And having explained these things to you, I think it should be clear that the context will define the meaning of every verse. So the first verse which I cited was in the context of the law of karma's operation, equally operating on each of us, a devotee or a non-devotee. Now we can understand this when we compare it with the Constitution of India. The judicial process is equal for the great officers, ministers, the Prime Minister, the President, and a laborer, a mechanic. All are equal before the law. If somebody commits a murder, he or she is tried equally, and then the process of judicial process is completed at the end in the Supreme Court of India. And if the Supreme Court of India confirms death penalty for him or her, that is practically the end of the matter. But no, the person who has been awarded death penalty can apply to the President of India, and the President usually rejects that prayer. But in some rare cases, the President finds some reason to pardon the person in spite of the fact that he has committed the offense and he has been punished legally by the Supreme Court of India, and then the person is let off. So here too, by comparison, we can understand the law of karma applies to everybody equally, a saint and a sinner. But ultimately, when somebody goes to the shelter of God, the situation might change, not necessarily changes, but might change. Like the President doesn't grant pardon to everybody, but she or he can grant pardon to somebody in appropriate cases. And there are verses in the Bhagavad Gita which show that this happens. Api chet so duracharo bhajte mamananya bhag sadhurev samantavya samyak vyavisto hi sah kshipram bhavati dharmatma shashvachantang nigacchati kaunteya pratijani name bhaktah pranashyati. So it depends on God. It is his discretion whether he is so happy with the devotee, his work, his philanthropy, his doing good to others, that he pardons some of his offenses and grants him nirvana or moksha or vaikuntha, even without each and every offense of his being punished. Or he waits for the moment when nature has completed its operations and finally punished the person for each and every offense that he committed, and then God grants nirvana or moksha to him. That's his discretion. Hari Sharanam.
Hari Sharanam.